Hello, I'm Joe. Welcome to my channel, AGTV for Life. I made these mini trunks along with items to accompany them as part of doll collections that I sell in my Etsy shop. I took some footage of the process when I was making the trunks, and I wanted to share that with you in the event you want to make the trunks as well. So we're going to go through each trunk, and I'm going to caution you, I don't have the most robust footage or details because when I captured moments of making the trunks, I didn't know that I was going to put together a YouTube video. So I'm going to apologize for that in advance, especially Kirsten's trunk. I have very little footage on that, but I can talk through the process. The other thing I'm not going to be able to do with you is give you printables for the insides of the trunk. That's something that you're just going to have to figure out on your own, or maybe not use what I used. Well, however you want to do it. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there up front and let you know, because the purpose of making the trunks was not to make a YouTube video. It was for other reasons. But since I had a lot of footage on my phone, I decided to whip this video up for you in the event that you want to make any of these trunks for your dolls. So let's dive in, starting with Samantha. I just wanted to give you a peek at both versions of Samantha's trunk that I made. The trunk on the left side, I only made one and I sold it to a friend. And the trunk on the right, I sell in my Etsy shop. The first thing you're going to need is mini trunks, and I picked all of these up at the Dollar Tree or at Michael's. I can't remember exactly where I got them from. It's been many months now. Once you have your trunks, you want to figure out which one will work best for whatever doll you're making a trunk for. And this is the trunk that worked best for Samantha. The first thing you want to do is to remove the hardware. So find a mini screwdriver and remove the hardware. Because after you remove the hardware, you need to sand the trunk because it does have some rough areas. Once it's sanded, you're going to paint it. And here is the paint color that I selected. And it's this type called Fawn. Now that you have your paint color, paint the trunk and let it dry. While the trunk was drying, I worked on what I was going to use for the inside of the trunk. And what I did for the first version of the trunk, I used one of Samantha's dresses and I pulled it really tight on a piece of foam board, and then I copied it on my printer. So that's how I got the inside for the first trunk that I showed you. For the second trunk that I made, I wanted the inside of the trunk to have the printout from Samantha's first edition trunk, which you can see here on the right side of your screen, and the print on the left side of the screen is the inside of the subsequent versions of the trunk. So anyway, once I found the print, I just printed it and I was off to the races. The next step was to figure out what I was going to use to put these little strips on the ends of the trunk. And I had a piece of leather around the house and I basically just cut these strips, and then I used some tacky glue and I tacked the leather strips down on the edges of the trunks just like this. The next step in my process was to create something similar to this logo. I wasn't really sure where I was going to put it on these mini trunks, but I needed a logo. So let me tell you a little bit about how I did that. And here are the various versions that I created using my Cricut. Weeding these decals was really difficult because the words are very narrow and thin. And my cat got his little paws on this one and chewed it all up. For some reason, Milo has an absolute obsession with Cricut vinyl. And here are a couple of attempts where I tried to weed the decal and it just was not happening. It was impossible. It was getting ruined every time I tried to remove the inside of the wording. The bigger I made the decal, the easier it was for me to weed it. So what I ended up doing is putting the decal on the bottom of the trunk. So there you have it, Samantha's trunk. Now let's move on to Addie's. This is the trunk once it was finished, but this is the shape I found in a local craft store, and I painted it brown. And then the next thing I did is I took a little strip of leather. I used E6000 glue and glued it to the front of the trunk. And once that was done, I searched the internet for some newspapers from the 1800s, and I found this print. And using Mod Podge, I glued it inside the bottom and the top of the trunk. Once it was glued in, I also put an additional coat of Mod Podge to cover it. The next step is to create this little handle on the top of the trunk that I used twine to do. And I pulled out my handy dandy drill that I've talked about before in my ear piercing DIY video, but I linked the drill down below and you can buy it on Amazon if you're interested in snatching it up. So what I did is I drilled a couple of holes in the top of the trunk and I used the largest drill bit. And then once I had that done, I fed the twine through and tied a knot on each side. One thing worth mentioning is that the twine splits apart, and what I did is I just used some glue and I glued it together so that it wouldn't be too frayed at the end, and then I could slip it right through the hole. And it was just so much easier to do it that way. Once it was through the two holes, it was so much easier to tie the knots. And this is what it looked like when it was done. The last step of the process was to put the hardware back on the trunk. And that was simple enough to do with a mini screwdriver. And here is the finished product. Now let's move on to Kit's trunk. And here's our mini Kit with her trunk. Doesn't she look so happy about it? So these are just a couple of pictures of the finished product to give you a vision of what it will look like when it's done if you decide to craft it. And we already talked about the labels that I put on the trunk, so we don't have to go through that again. The first step of the process was to pick a trunk. And when I went back and looked at all the trunks I had, I used this one here that you're looking at on the screen. So once I picked out the size and shape of the trunk that I wanted to use for Kits, I removed the hardware and I painted it with this paint, and the color is cherry red. So I painted the entire trunk on the outside and then parts of the inside, the edging, with the cherry red paint. And then once I did that, I found this cardstock and it's called Summer Linen. And then I used this cardstock to line the inside of the trunk. So I lined both the top and the bottom of the trunk with this cardstock. And then I got my handy dandy razor because at this point I had to trim the cardstock that I lined the trunk with. You see how it was sitting raised above the trunk? So I had to take the razor and cut along the edges so that the cardstock would be flush with the trunk. Then the next step was to figure out how to make these gold looking strips on the trunk to resemble Kit's trunk. Lucky me, I happen to have some cardstock that was gold color, and I created the shape using my Cricut and printed all these strips. So this was just so convenient for me, and this is where a Cricut comes in handy because I printed these strips and they were all the same exact size. So once I had the strips, what I did is I measured them along the top of the trunk and then I glued them down. And then I positioned the others, and here is the final product. Oh, the other thing I did is I put the hardware back on the trunk. I forgot to tell you that, but I'm sure that if you decide to follow this tutorial, you'll figure out what to do in the event that I missed a step here or there, because I was not making this video to do a tutorial. So there are definitely steps that I don't have pictures of, or I may have forgot to tell you. Now let's move on to Molly's trunk. I picked a trunk that I thought would work, and it was this one here, and then I removed the hardware. The next step was I took a look at Molly's trunk to figure out what I needed to do to customize it. So what I wanted to do is I needed the liner for the inside, so I had to search the internet for that, and I wanted some silver vinyl strips to put on the outside. So I just tucked that information in the back of my head. I sanded down the trunk, and then I painted it white. I found the print on the internet and I made a copy of it. And then I used Mod Podge to glue it inside the trunk. I used the end of a paintbrush to push the liner in the corners of the trunk in order to get a really nice fit. And here is Miss Molly with her trunk. Now, the one thing that I didn't walk you through is I used my Cricut to print out strips of silver vinyl, which you could see on the trunk here. And then I just used that vinyl and I wrapped it around the trunk. My goal was to try to make it look like her regular trunk the best I possibly could with what I had. And that's pretty much how I made Miss Molly's mini trunk. And here's a view of her collection that I put together. There's a meaning behind every single piece in the collection, and I've listed everything in my Etsy shop, and the description in the listing has a story for each item in case you're interested in checking that out. At this point, we went through Samantha's trunks, Addie's trunk, Kit's trunk, Molly's trunk, and we have two left. And one is Felicity's trunk and the other one is Kirsten's. But unfortunately, I have the worst instructions on how to do these two, mainly because they were the first two that I did, and I didn't take any pictures of the process and I didn't document it. So no pictures and no documentation, unfortunately. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about each one and what I did without giving you too many details, but the process is pretty much the same. Finding the trunks, removing the hardware, painting the trunks, and then figuring out what you're going to use for the inside to line the trunks, and then any of the embellishments that you want to use on the outside of the trunk. So I'm going to start off by talking to you about Kirsten's trunk, and then I'm going to talk to you about Felicity's trunk, and that will conclude this video. Let's talk about Kirsten's trunk. The process is the same as all the other trunks I already talked about. Was number one, find the trunk, remove the hardware, and then figure out what color paint you're going to use. In this case, I found this nice shade of blue, which was really close to Kirsten's trunk color, and I used that. And then I had to figure out what I was going to use for the inside of the trunk. And I actually have one of Kirsten's vintage dresses, and I took that and I made a copy of it on my printer, and I used the dress printout for the inside of the trunk. And the next thing I did is search the internet for the images that are on the outside of the trunk, and I found these two images, and I have software that removes the background, so I removed the background and then I transferred the images so that I could make a printout on this clear sticker paper. And look at how nice they came out. And then I put the images on the outside of the trunk and I sealed it with Mod Podge. Let's move on to Felicity's trunk. I'm going to have the most basic instructions on how to make Felicity's trunk. Once again, you need to pick out the trunk shape that you want to use, remove the hardware, paint it, and then in the case of Felicity's, what I did is Earlier in this video, I showed you that I was using some strips of leather that I have, and I cut some leather strips and I glued them on the trunk with E6000 glue. So this is what it looked like with the leather on it. And then I used these gold fasteners to create the little circular pieces on the trunk. There's a thin piece that comes out of the bottom of the fastener, and I cut that off, and then I glued the top piece of the fastener onto the leather. The other thing I did is I made a printout of Felicity's dress, and I used that for the inside of the trunk. And that's a wrap. I sure hope you enjoyed this video. I know it might have seemed a little choppy here and there, but as I said, I didn't plan on making a video and showing everybody how I made these trunks, but I had a change of heart and I used whatever pictures and footage that I had and cobbled this video together for you. So I sure hope it came across okay. If you have any questions about the process for any of the trunks or something wasn't clear, drop me a comment below and I will definitely get back to you and respond to whatever question you have. I hope you give this video a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel, I sure hope you press that subscribe button. I would surely appreciate that. Well, anyway, take care, and I'll be back again within the week, and I'll have another video for you. Bye, everyone.